What's up, everybody? It's the Tabletop Tyrant, and today we're going to be talking about Tamurkhan Part 2. Now, I know there is a lot more Warhammer community stuff going on. I will cover it all tomorrow. Today, I would like to just enjoy Tamurkhan with y'all. So if you don't mind, buckle in and let's get ready. So we left off with Tamurkhan crushing his enemies in Zanbaijin and rallying any warbands and tribes to his banner. Those who would not serve would be wiped from existence. As Tamurkhan carried out his plans of subjugation, he remembered there was a tribe of people who offered something more than the work power of man. This tribe was known to tame a beast known only as a Chaos War Mammoth. And the tribe responsible for breaking these monsters and the beasts of war were known as the Dolgan. The tribe was extremely infamous not only because of these war mammoths, but because of their lord Sal. His full title bore Sal the Faithless. He was a seer of extraordinary power. Worse yet, he was a deceitful scumbag, who was known to be more dishonest than a changeling's appearance. Bearing this in mind, Tamurkhan would decide to offer Sal a choice, that he could not be deceived out of a fool, join my forces, or die. Sal the Faithless was not an ignorant person, and was very well aware of what was happening in the surrounding lands. He has heard from passerbys, and even on the back of the very wind itself, that the Chaos Gods had selected a champion to lead a mighty war host, to crush all in their way, and that leader was destined for the throne of chaos. Sal was displeased, but knew the chances of him and the Dolgan people, of whom he cared very little for, would be crushed, and at best would only be able to thwart Tamurkhan's initial assault, not come anywhere close to beating him. If he sided with Tamurkhan, they would go south and plunder Kislev, gaining favor and glory, both of which were not bad alternatives. So when Tamurkhan's emissaries arrived, Sal decided to join Tamurkhan. However, Sal would experience his first Tamurkhanism, if you will, a minor plot twist. Tamurkhan was not going south to fight Kislev. He was going north. So north, in fact, he was going to the Tree Gallows to consult the Hag Witch and gain her blessing and sorceries. So, with much reluctance and dismay, Sal and the rest of these forlorn warriors that were not marked by Nurgle's touch would march north. Once Tamurkhan called a halt to his forces, it was more than obvious where he was going. Tamurkhan was going to the Gallows Tree, such an infamous place. Rumor says that the Hag Witch weighs your very soul, and if you're deemed worthy, you may meet with her, and she will bestow upon you a prophecy of your own greatness. Now, however true that prophecy is, no one knows, but you will get one nonetheless. However, if you fall short of her presumption of you, your body and soul will hang from the very gallows tree alongside hundreds of others. While hanging there, your body will turn into a ripe sack of flesh for maggots and carrion flies to feast and leave their eggs in. So, Tamurkhan looks to his left towards Kazakh the Befouled and leaves him in charge of his mighty host. And in the fresh body of a Slaaneshi prince, he departs for the tree gallows. As a month passed, Tamurkhan is nowhere to be seen, and his army is growing hungry and thirsty, digging up wells and attempting to forage what food they can from the surrounding area. Some tribes even took to cannibalism, however, that can be given to conjecture. To those listening to this tale, one should note that time in the northern waste does not pass as it does in the mortal lands. For you may walk 100 footsteps, and in doing so, decades could have passed, or walk for years only to have a single hour pass by in the mortal lands. So, a month to these men may indeed only be an hour or two to Tamurkhan. However, nonetheless, Tamurkhan meets with the Hag Witch and is deemed worthy. She tells him he is destined for greatness, but he walks a tightrope. Time and resources will be his downfall. The Hag Witch then tells him to go back to his army, reassuring him of his god's blessing, and with this, Tamurkhan will receive a vision of what he must do to sit on the throne of chaos. Tamurkhan's men, in the meantime, while all this is going on, are beginning to grow restless and frustrated. Water is scarce and so is food, and worse yet, there's no glory or plunder in sitting on your butt, waiting for your lord to arrive from whatever he's doing. As warriors began the rumble and descent of Tamurkhan, of course making sure to keep out of earshot of Kazakh, as to not gain his ire, they see a figure in the distance. Now this figure looked nothing like Sargoth. His flesh was rotten and his armor corroded and pockmarked. However, as this figure drew near, it would indeed be Tamurkhan. As Tamurkhan would make his way into the camp, in typical fashion, he would assemble a war council. This war council would consist of the best warlords and mages he had at his disposal. After forming said war council, he gathers them together and takes them close, and begins to tell them of his vision. He tells the council it is folly to try to take Kislev. Asavar Kul tried and was met with defeat. Kislev knows who its neighbors are, and so does the Empire. So Kislev is left extremely well defended, And even if they can sack Kislev, word will get out and it will stifle any hope of doing damage to the Empire. So Tamurkhan, grinning ear to ear, says he's taking the war host through the mountains of Morn. He goes on to tell the council of his vision, a dead land where heat and sorrow only thrived, and a fortress as tall as a mountain and as black as his soul. He believes Nurgle is telling him to recruit the Zharr to his cause. The rumored war machines and ranks upon ranks of disciplined men would be truly ignorant thing to not have at his disposal. For while yes, he had men that had dedicated themselves to the Dark God, and he had massive amounts of manpower, he well understood that manpower and men blessed by the Dark Gods cannot destroy stone ramparts. So with that plan in mind, he told him the final piece. After discussing how he was going to bring forth the Zharr, he would go to his next part of his plan. They would cut through the border princes, bring ruin and damnation to their lands. However, that was not the end goal. Tamurkhan's eye was set upon the city of Nuln. With the destruction of a mighty empire city, he would have his god's favor, and he would be able to sit on the throne. After Tamurkhan's war council was concluded, they rested for one final day and mustered their forces and set out to set the world asunder with pestilence and corruption. As they set out from the mountains of Morn, they would encounter one of their many minor hurdles. As Tamurkhan's army was making its way towards the mountains, they would stumble across an orc tribe. They would pour forth from the mountains, and these were the orcs of the Wintertooth tribe. These orcs were said to be unlike their kin, however, tainted by warp dust. They proved to be extremely aggressive and absolutely hulking creatures. The orcs carried obsidian weapons and had little disregard for being outnumbered. Tamurkhan surveyed their command elements, or what could pass as command for orcs, and he noticed that their shamans wore copper masks, and the lord of this tribe would show himself finally. The war boss called himself Gulgrog, and he rode atop a massive wyvern. These orcs initially engaged themselves with Tamurkhan's vanguard, thinking they had it in them to beat them back. However, when the rest of Tamurkhan's force showed up, they were erased from history itself, only to be found documented inside this very book. This victory was exactly what Tamurkhan needed, but in the back of his mind, the witch's words played over, time will be of the essence. Tamurkhan knew that if he was to ascend, he needed to be as punctual as possible. So after every incursion and large battle, Tamurkhan needed to keep his army focused as he moved towards his goal. It should be noted that after this, his men refit on any resources in the area, and as they pressed on, all wells were to be poisoned, damning anyone who would encounter them down the line, ensuring his god would be heard in the whispers of those afflicted by plague. As Tamurkhan's horde pushed ever onward, they would cross through the foothills of Shamash, adding to their ranks the degenerate beastmen who took this as an opportunity to wreak havoc and destruction wherever his army went. It was within this wonderful add-on, Sal the Faithless saw a very rare opportunity. Sal recalled, if memory had served him correct, that there was a watchtower in this very vicinity. This watchtower belonged to the Dragon Emperor and his people. Ashair, Sal would recall the name. This watchtower, if seized, could open new wonders and revelations to him. A new lore of magic to gleam in the wonders of the culture in Cathay. So Sal made a deal with the great host of beastmen to attack this emerald green watchtower. Sal would say the beastmen could take the spoils, for he only sought meager things that would hold little significance to the beastmen. The beastmen thought to themselves, what a wonderful idea, you keep the junk and we get everything else. With this, a pact with Sal would be made. Sal would detach from Tamurkhan with his Dolgan people and 10 war mammoths and his newfound beastmen allies. As Sal's force drew near, he would survey the topography of the land and get a feel for how to carry out his attack. Sal would see why this watchtower was merely a legend. It was utterly impervious to assault. The great road up to the gate was lined with posts and well-disciplined guards, who would lay down their lives for their emperor, and nothing short of disciplined devotion. At the base of this watchtower were jagged rocks, making it impossible to climb up and assault. To continue to make things worse, he could see, using his second sight, much closer and see the ramparts were covered in bronze, snarling mouths that were almost certainly cannons. This was just a danger he could see, going from rumors and from what he knew, that the people of Cathay were gifted in the ways of channeling the winds of magic, and that they would undoubtedly see things they had never seen before. Continuing to look at the defenses, he would see a lot of stone architecture, shaped to be that of a crow, and noted that they had granite claws. The fabled crowmen, no doubt, Sal thought to himself. A deadly combination when mixed with their disciplined regiment of guards. Sal, being the wise tactician he was, met with the Warherd and his Dolgan people to devise a plan to take the watchtower of Ashair. Sal told his army to take this watchtower. They needed to be as blind as possible. We must attack at night. He looked towards the beastmen. You are going to need to scale the walls and break open their gates. Once there is an opening, me and my people will take the war mammoths and break their defenses and their will to fight. As the sun died and the moon hung high, the army would make its way into position to lay siege to the watchtower of Ashair. Sal would hear, through the dead silence of the night, the initiation of the battle. With a cacophony of noise and bright lights, the siege was laid out before Sal. Cannons would boom, rockets whizzing through the air, destroying ranks of beastmen, blowing them into pieces and dust. Arrows would be notched and loosed. The sky would burn bright with colors of green, red, and even yellow. However, what cut through the winds most was the agony and hatred that would be heard in the braying of the beastmen. Unwavering and burning with rage, every loss they took only redoubled their efforts. And before they knew it, the beastmen were arriving at the walls. A break at last, for the walls were overgrown with vines, and the beastmen would use these vines to scale the rampart. Gorgons would rush to the tower gates, slamming trees into them in a vain attempt to pen them open. And before they could realize what was happening, mages of Cathay were blasting the Gorgons to dust with sorcerous energy, flaying them and cleansing their fairy soul while they were trying to breach the gate. Sal surveyed the land with his second sight. The beastmen were hard-pressed, but seeming to be endless in number. And as time went on, rocket fire would die, and banners would slowly disappear. Soon after a short moment of silence, the beastmen would let loose a bray of victory, and begin to consume the dead of their enemies. The Dolgan people, who had just watched their lord hand over all the glory to the beastmen in the assault, began to ready themselves to join the beastmen. However, Sal held up his hand and told them to hold. The Dolgans were irate, but they knew anyone to cross Sal would have a fate worse than death. Knowing Sal was not going to let disobedience get in the way of his plans, Sal gathered a couple war mammoths, as well as his own that he rode atop, and drew closer with reluctance. The reluctance would pay off, for there was a growing orb in the sky that was making its way towards the compound of the watchtower. Sal knew there was little he could do to stave off the inevitable, and instead chose to watch with grim fascination as his victory slipped away. The orb would grow to look like a crashing star, and that star would fall from the heavens and make contact with the beastmen forces in the compound. With a sudden flash, followed by a thunderous noise and a shockwave that would make the mammoth's very knees buckle, Sal would know that the beastmen that did not die would be slaughtered by the crowmen and any guard that had sought refuge within the watchtower. Turning his mammoth around, he thought to himself that those of Cathay quite lived up to the sobriquet. Defeated and enraged, Sal turned his people back, abandoning those beastmen to their fate. Sal, humiliated his defeat, reminded himself that he would have to answer to Tamurkhan for this, and that only added more humiliation and outrage to his dampened spirit. When Sal would reconnect with the main horde, he was immediately summoned to Tamurkhan's tent, where Tamurkhan would ask of his defeat. Sal, being who he is, said no defeat took place, angering Tamurkhan, for he himself saw the ball of energy and heard the explosion of it. Sal rebutted, playing a dangerous game. My lord, I have not lost a single Dolgan in that offensive. Be that I have, may the gods strike me down. Silence overtook the council. Silence because they were waiting for the gods to strike him down. But after a few moments, nothing happened. Tamurkhan dismissed him, not because he was happy, but because who was he to take the will of the gods in his own hands? For they did not strike him down, and surely neither would Tamurkhan. Tamurkhan was not looking to anger the gods or seek punishment for transgressions. After Sal's blunder, the army would gather up and continue. They would choose to take a pass through the mountains, and they would encounter massive giants. These giants would attack Tamurkhan's horde, eating his very people. However, seeing such a great opportunity to build up his army, Tamurkhan ordered the giants be enslaved to his forces, and that no one was to fell them. Now, his army had to get pretty clever because they didn't have much to make a giant understand a truce. Some war bands would leave out food and trap them, others would try to parlay with the giants, but would mostly end up as their lunch. And the best part, in my opinion, was how Slaaneshi cultists would drug themselves up and feed this individual to a giant, allowing the giant to become sedated. It was estimated that after all these attempts, Tamurkhan claimed 100 new giants in his army. After this victory, Tamurkhan and his horde would set off again. However, the vanguard would send a runner back to Tamurkhan to report the Ivory Road was no longer where it was supposed to be. Tamurkhan's humors would find themselves unbalanced, and he would proceed to kill everyone who bore that message, until seeing it for himself. As if an axe had cleaved a clean blow, the Ivory Road was indeed gone. Another setback against an hourglass of time that was unknown to him. Tamurkhan did the only thing he saw fit, to push his army south and try to bypass the setback. When Tamurkhan was finally starting to calm his choler, they would be set upon by the Ogres of the Red Fist tribe, and Tamurkhan took this in stride, now finally having something to vent his anger towards. The Red Fists were no slouches, however, and they were led by a ruthless tyrant named Karaka Breakmountain. This battle would go on for several hours, neither side making way. Tamurkhan knew that to get back on the road, he had to find this Karaka Breakmountain and break his lard ass over his knee. So he sought out his position and rammed Bublos right through, smashing aside debris and ogres. With this, Bublos would let loose a belch of toxic gas, melting ogres left, right, and center. Ogres would try to run, but they would get caught in this gas and simply erode into a sticky pile of goop. The Red Fist tribe wavered at this hideous monstrosity and were near defeat. Well, that is until Karaka jumped out. Karaka would call out Tamurkhan for being a coward in his own tongue. Dark speech. Karaka said, "You're big and bad up there on your toad, but why don't you come down here and take me on one-on-one?" Speaking in dark tongue served two purposes. It caught Tamurkhan's attention and insulted him, and more importantly, it caught his men's attention, who would see if Tamurkhan would rise to the occasion or cowardly sit atop the back of Bublos. Tamurkhan and Karaka would exchange blows, Tamurkhan with his well-balanced blade and Slaneshi body, and Karaka with his giant axe cleaving through blows in the air. They would strike, parry, riposte, until Tamurkhan would be able to poke Karaka's eye out with a thrust of his blade. Karaka would back up, reaching for his eye, swiping at the air. As Tamurkhan saw this, he took this as a cue to finish him off. However, when Tamurkhan lunged, he didn't see it for the feint it was. Karaka slammed into Tamurkhan's body with his massive gut plate. Tamurkhan would fall to the ground, trying to regain his bearing. As he rose, he would be grabbed by the shoulder and re-thrown back to the ground by Karaka. As Tamurkhan laid on the ground, Karaka would grab his arm and proceed to rip it off of his body like a chicken wing. As Karaka was about to deliver the finishing blow, he would feel pulsating in his socket of where his eye used to be, and that called him back to his senses. Karaka felt wiggling and writhing everywhere Tamurkhan's blade had made purchase with his body. Reaching up to feel, Karaka would see only writhing worms and maggots. Disgusted and slightly afraid, Karaka began pulling handfuls of worms and maggots. They would begin to pour out of his eye wound. Tamurkhan would seize the advantage, removing his helm, showing Karaka his true opponent. Tamurkhan jumped from Sargotha's head and into the tyrant's neck, chewing through jaw and throat alike. After breaching the tyrant's neck, Tamurkhan would nestle himself within the very chest cavity, just like he had done so many times before. The same miasma would appear from Zanbaijin, and the corpses on the battlefield began to writhe and erupt with carrion flies. The Red Fist tribe broke and were cut down by Tamurkhan's forces. Those who were unable to run bowed in supplication to their new lord, and slowly they would begin to transform into the Plague Father's puppets and gain Nurgle's gift of pestilence and plague. The Red Fist tribe was not the last enemy that Tamurkhan would encounter. He would cross Gnoblars, orcs, and more ogres, crushing all before his vast horde. All while doing this, his random chaos champions, some would be blessed and excel in their power, and some would turn to spawn. It's the way of the world. Tamurkhan, being sure to crush any of these would-be upstarts, made sure to keep within his pace. That is, until Tamurkhan would come across the plains of Zharr and the Chaos Dwarves. This is where we'd be introduced to Drashoth the Ashen. The Lord of the Chaos Dwarves and ruler of the Black Fortress had become aware of Tamurkhan's army and would meet them for battle. The battle that would ensue was of biblical proportions. Tamurkhan's warriors would be blown to straight particles as the demon engines would fire upon them. Tamurkhan was no fool. He sent out his foul beasts to the sky to attack and harass Drashoth's supply line, and slowly but surely Drashoth would run out of firepower. Drashoth, seeing this, devised a plan on the fly. Leave his immortal guard to stay behind and die. He would then send out his hobgoblin slaves to tie down Tamurkhan's forces, and he would regroup with his demon smiths out of nowhere. A crash of pandemonium and chaos would fall before his men. Before he could enact his plans, the Chaos War Mammoths broke his lines and began destroying his army. The Chaos Dwarves, knowing they faced death either way, would choose to stand their ground and die in battle. Drashoth would be able to escape to his black tower, where he would be met with this proposition. Know that I, Tamurkhan, son of the great Kurgan, master of hosts, bringer of desolation, champion of the Lord of Decay, speak. Would you, Lord Drashoth, perish, knowing that your land will be despoiled and your fortress plundered? By all witness to the dark gods, you have fought with honor and brought glory to thy master. Now yield without shame. Our war is not with the lords of Ashut, but with the lands of men. Join us, grant us the blessings of thy fell arts of war, and the spoils of victory shall fall to all alike. As it has been before, between the Kurgan and the sons of Zharr, let it be again, a pact struck between us. Negotiations would begin to broker and terms would be made. The Chaos Dwarves agreed to lend them aid in their affairs under the condition that they would get the lion's share of the spoils. And Tamurkhan had to deal with a tiny little problem by the name of Omdra. Omdra, however, was not tiny. She was a massive dragon, and when they approached her lands to make war with her, mealworms rose with Omdra, and so did foul crypt ghouls, hungry for the flesh of these dark warriors. The war that took place was a harrowing sight to behold. The field was littered with countless thousands from both Tamurkhan and the Chaos Dwarves. It was said that the great Chaos Spawn, Garth Garak, was laid low. So great, in fact, he was that we only heard about him in this very chapter. Furthermore, Bublos would be seriously wounded during a night attack on the main column of Tamurkhan's army. Only after many lives and bizarre magic would Omdra, the dragon, be beaten back and forced to leave her land. Omdra would slumber atop the bones of her dead kin far away from the Chaos Dwarves. With this side quest complete, Tamurkhan would be gifted the Black Cleaver from the Chaos Dwarves and would once again be on his way, all while feeling time pull at his soul. Tamurkhan's army would advance westward towards the World's Edge Mountain. Once they arrived there, they would take Death's Pass and arrive at the Border Princes. There was a surprise, however, waiting for Tamurkhan's army in the opening of Death Pass, and it was 1/3 of the Legion of Asgorth, and an entire battery of war machines ready to deal death to any that would stand in Tamurkhan's way. Once the two armies merged, they would go through Death's Pass and absolutely obliterate the kingdoms of the Border Princes. Tamurkhan, seeing the morale of his men rise, would allow them to slip the leash and utterly destroy everything within the vicinity. It is within one of these skirmishes that we met Lietpold the Blac, a general to a band of mercenaries who called themselves the Confederation of the Eagle. These mercenaries were no slouches and put up a great fight for about 2 sentences before Lietpold betrayed his captain, stole his horse, and fled the battlefield. After a few weeks of wanton destruction, Tamurkhan decided it was time to press on. Some of Tamurkhan's followers learned from their last mistake and did not heed the call, instead opting to hide out in the hinterlands. It is said that to this day the Border Prince's population and land remains as devastated as they were then, unable to recover from Tamurkhan's horde. As Tamurkhan rallied his army, he would be beset by awful storms and rain, flooding Tamurkhan's path. Tamurkhan would take his rage out on those around him. He knew that time was on his side. He knew it was running out, yet he allowed his armies to dally too long so he could boost their morale. With these storms and hurricanes, the Blackfire Pass was blocked, and this great army he had worked to build was proving to be his downfall. While all this was taking place, Sal the Faithless was poisoning the hearts of those men not loyal to Nurgle, and all the troops see these storms as the gods' displeasure towards Tamurkhan. While Tamurkhan's army is arguing over gods and omens, Drathoth decided to find a solution, and a solution he did find. There were some long-abandoned dwarf citadels and mines. Drathoth figured they could take this path and be spat out at the foothills of the Empire. However, Sal, who saw through magic, was able to see only death, and told Tamurkhan as much. Sal would go on to say that this decision would prove to be unwise in history's telling. To top that, there were reports of their vanguard encountering night goblins from this very passage. However, Tamurkhan brushed everyone's concerns aside and chose to take Drathoth's paths. Besides, who were they to give in to these weak night goblins? Was he not chosen of chaos and blessed by the god Nurgle? With that, they would enter these abandoned mines. It's just a long story, and it's really good, really well written. I'm trying to make sure I capture a lot of the battles that maybe aren't talked about or discussed, because it gives you a kind of a cool way to build your own armies if you want to do orcs with copper masks and obsidian weapons. You now have that description of what it would have looked like. So I am thankful that y'all tuned in. Tune in next week, Monday, for Tamurkhan Part 3, and tune in Friday for the Chaos Dwarf Army Breakdown. Everybody, until next time, peace.